He didn't shout or argue. He simply turned off the television and looked at me like I no longer belonged in the room. I thought that moment was the end of everything. I didn't know it was only the first door closing. I had lived in that house long enough to recognize its silences. The walls, the furniture, even the old television carried the weight of unspoken routines. That night, when he asked me to leave, nothing dramatic happened. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just a quiet dismissal that felt final. Or so I believed. The television was still talking when the room went black. One moment, voices were filling the space between us. The next, there was only the soft click of the button and my own breathing, suddenly too loud. He didn't sigh. Didn't shake his head. He just held the remote in his hand like it had always been there, like this was something he'd practiced. "I think you should go," he said. Not angry. Not tired. Just finished. The clock above the doorway kept moving. Its second hand scraped forward, slow and patient. The house stayed exactly the same, as if it hadn't heard a thing. I sat there a moment longer, waiting for something else to happen. For him to add a sentence. Or take it back. But he didn't look at me. The lamp by the couch still cast that yellow circle on the rug. The one I'd vacuumed that morning. I noticed a thread loose at the corner, curling like it wanted to escape. It struck me then how ordinary everything looked. How unfairly normal the room felt for what I thought was an ending. I stood up slowly. My knees made a small sound, the way they do when the weather's changing. He shifted his weight but didn't turn. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was packed tight, like a room filled with furniture you can't see in the dark. I walked to the chair where I'd left my sweater, folded it once, then again, too carefully. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I'd expected shaking. Tears. Something dramatic enough to justify the moment. But all I felt was a quiet pressure behind my ribs. The hallway light buzzed faintly. It always did. He'd said once he meant to fix it. That was years ago. I wondered briefly if he ever would now. The thought passed through me without stopping. Picked up my bag. It felt lighter than it should have. As if it already knew I wouldn't be staying long. He finally spoke again, softer this time. "I'll leave the door unlocked." I nodded, even though he wasn't looking. The floor creaked beneath my steps. Not loudly. Just enough to remind me it was there. Like it remembered all the times I'd crossed it before, carrying groceries or laundry or nothing at all. The sound followed me to the door. My coat was still hanging where I'd left it. I slipped my arms into the sleeves and paused, my hand resting on the knob. The metal was cold, colder than I expected. I turned back once. He was standing by the window now, looking out into the dark yard. The reflection of his face floated faintly in the glass, not quite lined up with the real thing. For a second I thought he might say something else. Name. An apology. An explanation. He didn't. The door opened with a low groan. Outside, the air hit me sharp and clean like it had teeth. Winter wasn't supposed to be this close yet, but it felt like it had been waiting. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The sound echoed too loudly in the quiet street. The porch light flickered, then steadied. Moths hovered near it, bumping gently against the glass like they always did, unaware anything had changed. I stood there a moment listening. No footsteps followed me. No voice called my name. Just the hum of the light and the faraway bark of a dog I didn't recognize. I walked down the steps slowly, each one taking more effort than the last. At the bottom I stopped again. My breath came out in a thin cloud, pale and brief. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself, feeling the fabric press against my chest. The house behind me looked the same as it always had. Windows dark, curtains drawn. It didn't lean toward me or pull away. Just stood there, keeping its secrets. I realized then that nothing had actually ended. Not really. There hadn't been a fight. No final words to replay later. Just a decision delivered calmly like weather. As I walked down the sidewalk, the street lights blinked on one by one. Pools of light separated by long stretches of shadow. I moved through them quietly, my shoes tapping out a rhythm I didn't recognize. With every step, a question followed me. Why now? Why like this? I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. That sometimes people leave without explanations, and sometimes you're the one being left. I told myself that silence could be its own kind of answer. But the quiet felt unfinished. Halfway down the block, I stopped and looked back once more. The porch light was still on. Small thing. But it felt deliberate. Like a sign I wasn't meant to read yet. The cold settled deeper into my bones as I turned away again. I didn't know it then, but that moment, the dark screen, the quiet voice, the unlocked door, wasn't the ending I thought it was. It was only a pause. A breath held too long. Something had been set in motion. And somewhere, even then, someone else already knew my name. The porch light flickered the moment I stepped outside. Not enough to go out. Just enough to notice. I paused with one foot on the threshold, the door still warm at my back. The night air pressed in, thin and sharp, carrying the smell of damp leaves and something metallic I couldn't place. I held my breath, listening, as if the house might speak if I gave it time. Didn't. I eased the door shut behind me. Slowly, careful not to let the latch click too loud. It felt important to leave without noise, as if sound might turn the moment solid, make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. My hand lingered on the knob until the cold seeped through my skin. The porch boards knew my weight. They creaked anyway. Softly. Like a reminder, not a complaint. The light above me steadied at last. Its glow spread across the steps, catching the dust in the air, turning it into something almost gentle. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. It pulled uneven, filled with a few things I'd grabbed without thinking. Keys, a sweater, the old notebook I never wrote in anymore. More questions than belongings, I thought. The words landed and stayed. As I stepped down, his voice replayed itself in my head. Not the words. Tone. Measured. Like he'd reached a conclusion earlier and was only sharing it now. No anger to push against. No cracks to slip through. That was what unsettled me. Shouting would have been easier. Even blame. But resolution has a weight all its own. It settles into the body and refuses to move. I reached the bottom of the steps and stopped. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels staged. A parked car down the block reflected the porch light in its windshield. Somewhere far off, a train horn sounded, long and low, as if it were calling for something it had already passed. I didn't look back. I told myself it was strength, or dignity, or some final act of control. The truth was simpler. I was afraid of what I might see if I did. Afraid the house would look unchanged. Afraid it wouldn't. I started walking. Each step took me farther from the sound of the porch boards, farther from the familiar hum of the refrigerator through the walls, farther from the shape of his silence. The sidewalk was uneven, cracked by years of roots pushing up from below. I'd learned where to step without thinking. My body remembered even if my mind didn't want to. His tone followed me anyway. Not angry, not cruel, just finished. I replayed it again and again, like turning a stone over in my pocket, looking for an edge, flaw, something I'd missed. But it stayed smooth, offering no answers. Halfway down the block, a breeze moved through the trees. Leaves scraped together overhead, a dry, restless sound. I pulled my coat tighter, though it wasn't cold enough to need it. Not really. The air felt different, though, heavier, like it carried something unseen. I realized then that silence isn't empty. It's crowded. It fills itself with whatever you bring to it. Regret. Oh. Old conversations that never found an ending. The quiet around me pressed close, matching my pace, as if it had decided to walk me out. A street light buzzed as I passed beneath it. The light flickered, then steadied, casting my shadow long and thin across the pavement. For a moment, it looked like someone else was walking beside me. Slowed. The shadow slowed too. Kept going. I told myself this chapter was closed. People leave all the time. Lives divide quietly, without ceremonies. I'd seen it happen before. I believed I was watching it happen to me now. But the silence didn't behave like an ending. It didn't fade as the house disappeared behind me. It didn't loosen its grip when I reached the corner. If anything, it grew more attentive, as if it were listening, waiting. I crossed the street, my shoes tapping too loud against the asphalt. The sound echoed in a way that made me wince. I glanced around, half expecting a curtain to move, a door to open. Nothing did. At the bus stop, the bench was cold and slightly damp. I sat anyway. The wood pressed through my coat, grounding me. Across the street, a window glowed blue with another television left on too late. Laughter spilled out, canned and distant, then cut off abruptly. The sound made my chest tighten. Checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Just the time, glowing back at me like it had nothing better to do. I slipped it back into my bag, unwilling to let it narrate the moment. I thought about all the ways leaving could have sounded. Doors slamming. Footsteps chasing after me. My name called once, then again. None of that happened. Instead, there was just this. Me. The night. And a quiet that knew too much. I tried to remember the last thing he'd said before the screen went dark. Not the words, those were already gone, but the look on his face. Focused. Almost gentle. Like someone setting down something heavy after carrying it too long. That image stayed with me. Heavier than any argument. The bus came eventually, its headlights washing the street in white. I stood and stepped forward, then hesitated. The driver glanced at me, waiting. I climbed on, the door folding shut behind me with a hiss that sounded final. I took a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away, I finally let myself look back. Just once. The street slid past, familiar shapes dissolving into shadow. I couldn't see the house anymore, but I felt it. Like a place you've left that hasn't finished with you yet. The bus rumbled on, carrying me somewhere that wasn't there and wasn't here. The city blurred, lights stretching into thin lines against the glass. My reflection stared back at me, pale and uncertain, like it was still deciding who it belonged to. I rested my forehead against the window. The glass was cool, steady. Reliable in a way people rarely are. I thought then, briefly, that this might be the quiet before everything settles. That tomorrow, the silence would lift, and the shape of my life would make sense again. But the quiet stayed close. Too close. And somewhere inside it, a question kept its footing, walking beside me, refusing to be left behind. The clock glowed faintly across the room, a soft green eye that refused to close. I lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, my shoes placed neatly by the door like they were waiting for instructions. The room smelled like detergent and old wood. Somewhere in the building, a pipe knocked once, then went quiet again. Sleep never arrived. Circled. Hovered. But it didn't land. I watched the ceiling fan turn without moving the air. Each rotation felt slower than the last. I counted them for a while, then stopped when the numbers began to feel like promises I couldn't keep. The night stretched itself thin, pulling minute after minute until time felt less like a line and more like a weight. Closed my eyes. That was a mistake. His voice came back immediately. Not the words but the space around them. The way he'd paused before speaking. The way the room had seemed to hold its breath with him. I replayed the moment again, adjusting it slightly each time, as if a different angle might reveal something new. What if I'd said something first? What if I'd stayed seated? What if I'd asked why? The questions didn't answer themselves. They only multiplied. The bed creaked when I turned onto my side. The sound startled me, sharp in the quiet. I lay still afterward, listening for a response that never came. No footsteps in the hall. No doors opening or closing. Just the steady hum of the city outside, distant and uninterested. I realized then how loud a room can be when you're alone with your thoughts. Every shadow took on a shape it didn't deserve. The coat hanging by the closet door looked like a person standing there, waiting. I stared at it until my eyes adjusted and it became just fabric again. Ordinary. Harmless. Still my heart didn't slow. I sat up and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The floor was colder than I expected, the chill rising quickly through my socks. I pressed my feet flat, grounding myself in the sensation. Cold was real. Cold was now. It helped a little. The clock read 2:17. I tried to remember the last time I'd slept through the night. The memory felt far away, like something borrowed from another life. Back when nights knew how to end. Back when mornings arrived without resistance. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. The street below was empty, washed in the pale glow of a single streetlight. A piece of paper skittered across the pavement, pushed by a wind I couldn't feel from here. It caught briefly on the curb, then disappeared. I wondered what I'd missed. Not that night. Before it. A look held too long. A sentence that ended too early. The way he'd stopped talking about certain things months ago, quietly, without announcement. I noticed, of course. Always notice. I just told myself it didn't mean anything. The night seemed to lean closer, listening. I thought about the house I'd left. The familiar sounds it must be making without me. The refrigerator cycling on, the old floor settling, the wind brushing against the siding. I imagined him moving through those rooms alone. His footsteps measured, unhurried. Did he sleep? Or was he lying awake too, staring at a different ceiling, asking different questions? The thought unsettled me more than I expected. I returned to the bed and sat on the edge, elbows on my knees, hands clasped loosely. My fingers traced a faint scar on my thumb, something I'd earned years ago opening a box that didn't want to be opened. I'd forgotten it was there until now. The clock ticked forward. 3:04. I lay back down, this time pulling the blanket up to my chest. The fabric smelled like home or what used to pass for it. I pressed it close, listening to my own breathing, slow and uneven. Every sound felt like a question. A car passed outside, tires hissing against the pavement. Somewhere a door slammed. Laughter rose briefly, then faded. Life was continuing without hesitation, and I felt strangely left behind by it. At some point, I realized I wasn't waiting to fall asleep. I was waiting for something else. Knock. Phone call. A sudden understanding. Anything that would explain why I'd been sent away so cleanly, so quietly. Why there had been no room for negotiation. No space for repair. The clock read 4:36. I laughed once, softly, at how dramatic the numbers felt. As if time itself were making a point. As if the night had decided to stretch just to see how much I could hold. My eyes burned, heavy with exhaustion, but my mind stayed sharp, alert in a way that felt unnatural. Every thought arrived fully formed, demanding attention. There was no drifting, no soft edges, only clarity and discomfort. I began to understand that whatever had happened wasn't just about that night. The leaving, the dark screen, calm voice, those were only the surface. Something else lived underneath it, something older. The realization settled slowly, like dust in a closed room. I sat up again, suddenly restless, and reached for my bag. I opened it and checked its contents, though I already knew what was there. His notebook, wetter, everything in its place, everything insufficient. I closed the bag and set it by the door, lining it up carefully with my shoes. The clock read 5:12. Outside, the sky began to change. Not light exactly, just less dark. The kind of shift you only notice if you've been awake long enough to earn it. A thin grayness seeped into the world, softening the edges of things. I stood by the window again and watched it happen. Morning didn't arrive all at once. Never does. It approached carefully, testing the ground. The streetlight clicked off with a small, final sound. Birds began to stir, tentative at first, then louder, more certain. I felt tired down to my bones. But I was also awake in a way I hadn't been before. Alert. As if some part of me knew the night hadn't been a punishment, but a preparation. I stepped back from the window and picked up my coat. The fabric felt familiar in my hands, steady. I slipped it on and took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that felt new, even indoors. I didn't know what I was waiting for, only that I was waiting. And whatever I'd been sent away from, It wasn't finished with me yet. The morning arrived without ceremony. No color, no warmth, just a thin gray light slipping through the window, careful not to wake anything it didn't have to. I was already awake. I stood by the sink with my hands resting on the cold porcelain, watching the sky decide what kind of day it wanted to be. The kettle sat untouched on the stove. I hadn't filled it. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Outside, the city moved quietly, like it was trying not to disturb me. It felt like the world knew something I didn't. The clock on the wall said it was morning, but my body didn't believe it. Time felt loose, unfastened from its usual rules. I reached for my phone without thinking, the movement automatic, almost hopeful. Nothing. No missed calls. No messages. No explanation waiting patiently in a blue bubble. I checked again, slower this time, as if the screen might change its mind if I gave it space. Didn't. The phone felt heavier in my hand than it should have. I set it down face up on the counter, unable to turn away from it completely. The silence stretched. I opened the window an inch. Cold air slipped in, sharp and clean, carrying the sounds of early morning. Footsteps on the sidewalk, a distant bus braking, someone coughing behind a wall I couldn't see. Life continuing, organized and indifferent. I leaned my forehead against the glass. The city looked unfamiliar from this angle. Same buildings, same streets. But I felt like I'd stepped just outside my own life, like I was watching it from a place that didn't belong to me anymore. I told myself this was normal. Endings often feel this way. Sudden. Incomplete. Not everything comes with an explanation. Some things just stop. I repeated that thought the way you repeat a line you're trying to memorize, hoping it would eventually sound true. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it standing up. The cold slid down my throat, grounding me in a way sleep hadn't. I hadn't realized how thirsty I was until then. The body always knows before the mind does. On the small table by the window sat my bag, still packed the way I'd left it the night before. I hadn't unpacked it. Something in me resisted the idea. Like doing so would mean accepting that this was more than temporary. I sat down across from it and studied the floor. The wood had scratches I didn't remember earning. Thin white lines running in no particular direction. Proof that time had been passing even when I wasn't paying attention. I thought about how quickly it had all happened. The dark screen. Calm voice. A door. No warning. No build-up. Just an ending dropped into the middle of an ordinary evening. That was what bothered me most. If there had been signs, I would have followed them. If there had been tension, I would have felt it. But everything had been quiet. Too quiet. Picked up my phone again. Still nothing. I wondered if he was awake. If he'd already moved through the house, making coffee, opening curtains, stepping around the places where I used to stand. I pictured him pausing, just briefly, in a doorway. Or maybe he didn't pause at all. The thought stung more than I expected. I stood and pulled on my coat, even though I wasn't going anywhere. The fabric felt familiar, comforting. I needed the weight of it around my shoulders. Needed to feel held by something. Outside, the light had shifted slightly. The gray softened at the edges, hinting at a color that might arrive later. Or might not. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and walked without direction. Just far enough to feel the city around me. A woman waited at the corner with her hands tucked into her sleeves. A man jogged past, breath puffing out in short bursts. Somewhere, a radio played faintly through an open window. No one looked at me. I liked that. I walked until my feet told me to stop. Then I turned back. The whole time a question followed me. Quiet but persistent. Why so suddenly? Not why it ended. I could almost understand that. People change. Feelings shift. But the speed of it, the clean cut, the lack of transition, felt wrong. Like a page torn out of a book before the sentence was finished. Back inside, I sat by the window again. The phone buzzed once, sharply, making my heart jump before I could stop it. A notification. Not from him. I exhaled slowly and set it back down. I told myself that answers don't always arrive when we want them. Sometimes they come later, disguised as something else. Sometimes they never come at all. I tried to accept that. But the feeling wouldn't settle. It wasn't grief exactly. Or anger. It was something quieter. A sense that I'd been moved out of the way. That something had been rearranged without my consent. I closed my eyes and listened. The room had its own sounds now. The low hum of electricity. The faint tick of the radiator. The building breathing around me. It felt like a place waiting to be occupied, unsure if it should get comfortable. I realized then that I didn't feel finished. Whatever had ended the night before had left a loose thread behind. And threads, I knew, have a way of pulling. The phone remained silent. The morning moved forward anyway. Light filled the room a little more generously now, touching the edges of things, revealing dust in the air. I watched it settle and thought about how many mornings I'd woken up believing I knew what the day would hold. Today wasn't one of them. I stood, picked up my bag and placed it closer to the door. Not as a plan. Just as a possibility. Outside, a knock echoed somewhere down the hall. Not for me. Not yet. But the sound lingered longer than it should have. I turned toward the door, my heart steady but alert. The day had begun. But whatever this was, it wasn't finished. The knock came just before noon. Not loud. Not urgent. 3 firm taps, evenly spaced, like someone who knew exactly how long to wait between them. I was standing at the counter, rinsing a mug I hadn't used. The sound cut through the room cleanly, sharper than it should have been. I froze with my hands in the sink, water still running, my reflection trembling in the metal basin. No one ever knocked like that. I turned off the tap and listened. The building settled around me, pipes clicking softly, a door closing somewhere below. The knock didn't repeat itself. Whoever was there knew how to wait. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked toward the door, each step slower than the last. The floor creaked under my weight, not complaining, just noticing. I stopped a few feet away and held my breath. Then came the knock again. Same rhythm. Same patience. Opened the door. A man stood in the hallway I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, maybe older. His coat was buttoned all the way up despite the mild weather, the fabric worn smooth at the elbows. He stood straight but not stiff, like someone trained to be careful with other people's spaces. His eyes met mine and stayed there, searching without staring. For a moment neither of us spoke. "Are you?" he began, then stopped. Followed. "Are you the one who lived with him?" The question landed softly, but it landed. I nodded once. Didn't trust my voice yet. He exhaled, slow and controlled, as if that answer had been heavy to carry. Then he did something unexpected. He asked my name. Not politely. Not casually. Deliberately. Like it mattered. Told him. He repeated it under his breath, testing the sound of it, then nodded to himself. The hallway felt narrower suddenly, like the walls had leaned in to listen. "My name is Daniel," he said. "I hope this isn't a bad time." I didn't answer that. I stepped back instead and held the door open wider. He hesitated, just a second longer than necessary, then stepped inside, careful not to touch anything. The room felt different with him in it. Not threatened. Just altered. Like a chair pulled slightly out of place. He took off his coat and folded it neatly over his arm. His eyes moved around the space, not with curiosity, but recognition. As if he'd seen it before, described in detail, or imagined it carefully. "You weren't supposed to be alone today," he said, not accusing. Just stating a fact. That was the moment my chest tightened. "I didn't know anyone was keeping track," I said. A corner of his mouth lifted, then fell. "Neither did I," he replied. We sat at opposite ends of the small table. The space between us felt deliberate, respectful. He rested his hands flat on the wood. They were steady. "I didn't come to interfere," he said. "I came because something didn't sit right." Waited. Silence stretched, but not uncomfortably. He seemed to choose his words the way some people choose stones. By weight, not appearance. "He told me you'd already left," Daniel continued. Said it was mutual. Clean. My eyes dropped to the table. The grain ran in long, uneven lines. I followed one with my finger, grounding myself. It wasn't, I said quietly. Daniel nodded once, like he'd expected that answer too. He said he didn't want you involved, Daniel added. That it would complicate things. The word hung between us. Complicate. I thought of the night before. Calm voice. The dark screen. The unlocked door. What things? Asked. Daniel looked at me then, really looked. His eyes softened, not with pity, but with something closer to regret. That's what I'm here to figure out, he said. The room felt smaller. Or maybe I was just more aware of it. The hum of the refrigerator. The tick of the clock. The way the light from the window caught dust in the air, turning it briefly into something visible. Daniel leaned back slightly, as if giving me space to decide what came next. I knew him before you did, he said. Long before. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how little it hurt to hear it. He has a way of closing doors quietly, Daniel went on. You don't hear them latch until it's too late. I swallowed. He asked me to check on something, Daniel said. Then changed his mind. Asked me not to. And you came anyway, I said. Yes. Why? Daniel glanced toward the window, where the city moved on without us. Because when someone erases a person from a room that quickly, he said, it's usually not about them. The realization settled slowly. Not rejection. Removal. I felt it then. Clearer than I had all morning. I wasn't sent away because I didn't belong, I said, mostly to myself. Daniel met my eyes again. No, he said gently. You were sent away because you did. We sat with that truth, letting it find its place. I don't know what happens next, Daniel said after a while. But I know you were meant to know this much. He stood, slipping his coat back on. The room seemed to exhale with him. The door, he paused. He'll come back, Daniel said. Not today. Maybe not willingly. But this isn't finished. He nodded. Already knew. Daniel opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Before leaving, he turned once more. You didn't imagine the ending, he said. You were just asked to leave before the story caught up. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I stood there long after his footsteps faded, my hand resting against the wood. The knock hadn't belonged to him. It had belonged to the truth. And now that it had found me, I knew it wouldn't stay quiet much longer. The hallway clock was still ticking when he said the name. Not loudly. Not like a revelation. Just enough to change the air. It slipped between us the way dust slips through sunlight. Certain. Uninvited. I hadn't heard that name in years. Not out loud. Not in daylight. My hand tightened around the edge of the door. The wood felt older than it had yesterday. Like it remembered things I'd worked hard to forget. The man waited. Didn't rush me. Didn't look away. And in that pause, the past stood up straight and cleared its throat. Some names don't fade. They just go quiet. I had folded that one away with winter coats and broken receipts. Tucked it behind the version of myself that no longer lived here. The man stood on my doorstep like he'd rehearsed this moment. Neat jacket. Shoes clean enough to mean something. He didn't step forward. Didn't step back. I hope I've got the right person, he said. I nodded once. Didn't trust my voice yet. The street behind him was alive in the ordinary way. A bus sighed at the corner. Someone laughed too loudly across the road. Life continuing. Unaware. Inside, the house held its breath. The kettle had gone cold. The curtains were still half drawn like they were unsure what to witness. He said the name again. Carefully this time. It landed heavier. I felt it in my wrists. In the back of my knees. I hadn't realized how much effort it took to keep certain doors shut. How tired my hands were from holding them closed. I didn't expect you to remember, he said. That was when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. He wasn't guessing. I remember, I replied, though the word felt generous. Remembering made it sound neat. Organized. This was Messier. He glanced past me into the hallway. Not rude. Just curious. As if he were measuring what kind of life fits behind a person now. They said you might be hard to find, he continued. Or gone. The word hovered. I thought of the empty mug by the sink. The plant I kept forgetting to water. The phone with no new messages. I didn't know people were still looking, I said. He nodded slow. Like he'd expected that answer. There was some concern, he said. That you might disappear. Disappear. Not leave. Not move on. Disappear like smoke. Like something that doesn't leave a forwarding address. I watched his mouth form the words, but my ears were somewhere else. Back in a room with yellow walls. A window that never opened all the way. Back when that name still belonged to someone breathing beside me. I was told to check on you, he said. Check on me. Not warn. Not accuse. Just check. I studied his face then. The way his eyes carried weight without cruelty. The way he didn't soften his voice to make it easier. You knew them, I said. Not a question. Yes, he replied. Enough. Enough is a dangerous word. It leaves room for everything you don't want to ask. He reached into his jacket and stopped halfway. Then let his hand fall back to his side. I don't have proof, he said. Only a sense. Sense. I almost laughed. Almost. That name had taught me how powerful a sense could be. How instincts whisper before they scream. I thought it was over, I said. The man tilted his head. Not in disagreement. In understanding. Most things don't end, he said. They just stop knocking. The words settled somewhere deep. I realized then what had been unsettling me all morning. Not the knock. Not the man. But the feeling that something unfinished had been waiting patiently. Letting me believe silence meant safety, he stepped back from the door. Gave me space I didn't know how to use yet. I'll leave you my number, he said. In case you remember something. Or feel like talking. He placed the card on the small table by the door. Didn't hand it to me. Kindness. When he turned away, the street swallowed him easily. Like he'd never been there at all. I closed the door slowly. Listened to the click of the lock. The house exhaled. I stood in the hallway with a name echoing where my heartbeat should have been. Realizing disappearance isn't about leaving a place. It's about leaving a version of yourself behind. And somewhere deep inside, something old was already awake. We sat at opposite ends of the table like strangers borrowing the same room. The clock above the sink ticked louder than it should have. Each second felt deliberate. Sunlight leaned in through the window, thin and pale, tracing the rim of his coffee cup. He hadn't touched it. Neither had I. Silence settled between us. Not awkward, not kind. Just heavy. I watched his hands. They rested flat on the table, steady, like they'd practiced patience. Somewhere inside me, a thought kept knocking. Soft at first, then louder. This wasn't about last night. It never was. The house looked different with him inside it. Smaller. Like the walls were leaning closer to here. I noticed things I usually ignored. A crack in the tile near the fridge. The hum of the old fan struggling to stay awake. A photograph on the shelf turned face down months ago, though I couldn't remember why. He cleared his throat but didn't speak yet. Not rushing. Not apologizing. I wondered how many rooms he'd sat in like this. How many lives paused mid-breath while he chose words carefully. Outside, a car passed too fast. Someone called a dog's name. Normal sounds doing their normal jobs. I felt separate from them. Like I was watching life through glass. I folded my hands in my lap. Unfolded them. Folded them again. I wanted him to start talking. And I didn't. Because once words arrived, they couldn't be undone. And silence. Silence still held the possibility that I was wrong. That this feeling in my chest was just fear. Not truth. There were conversations, he said finally. His voice didn't carry judgment. Just wait. Before yesterday, he added. I didn't respond. Didn't nod. Didn't ask. I let him continue. Meetings. Phone calls. quiet decisions. Quiet. The word caught. I thought of all the times I'd lowered my own voice. To be agreeable. To be easy. To not take up space. You weren't meant to hear them, he said. Meant. As if intention softened the damage. I stared at the grain of the table. How the lines twisted and stopped abruptly. Like they'd changed their minds halfway through becoming something. They thought it would be easier, he continued. For everyone. Easier for who? I wanted to ask. But my throat stayed closed. He shifted in his chair. Just slightly. Enough to signal discomfort. By the time it happened, he said. It had already been decided. Decided. That word landed harder than I expected. Because it meant last night wasn't sudden. Wasn't emotional. Wasn't a mistake spoken too quickly. It was the end of a sentence I'd never been allowed to read. So I was never part of it, I said. It came out softer than I'd rehearsed in my head. Not angry. Just tired. He didn't answer right away. Looked at the window instead. I don't think they saw it that way, he said. Not consciously. Consciously. Another careful word. They told themselves they were protecting you, he added. From uncertainty. From waiting. I almost smiled. Almost. Waiting had been my specialty. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for acknowledgement. Waiting for something unnamed to arrive and explain everything. They planned it, I said. Not accusing. Confirming. Yes, he replied. That was it. No justification. No defense. Just the truth, placed gently on the table between us. I felt something shift then. Not break. Little. The confusion that had followed me since last night finally found its shape. It wasn't grief. Not yet. It was recognition. I hadn't been dismissed. I'd been managed. And somehow that hurt more. We sat there a little longer after that. The silence had changed. It wasn't hiding anything anymore. He stood first. Pushed his chair in neatly. Like someone who respected endings. The door. He paused. I'm sorry, he said. And this time it wasn't procedural. I nodded once. Didn't trust anything more. After he left, I stayed at the table. Watched the light move across the floor. Low. Unbothered. I realized then that not being told was the point. Knowing would have given me a chance to speak. And somewhere inside me, a voice I'd kept quiet for years, was finally clearing its throat. The key hesitated before turning, like it remembered something I was trying to forget. Metal against metal. A sound I'd heard 1,000 times. The door opened into stillness. Not silence. Stillness. The air inside felt different. Cooler. Claimed. Sunlight lay across the floor in wide, careless stripes, touching places that hadn't been touched in hours. Maybe longer. I stood there longer than necessary. Hand still on the knob. Breathing shallow. Behind me the man waited. Didn't rush me. Going back felt wrong. But not going back felt like pretending none of it had happened. The house had always known my footsteps. Recognized them. Adjusted to my weight. Now every step felt borrowed. The floor creaked differently. Not louder. Hesitant. Like it was deciding whether to remember me or not. I moved slowly, noticing things I'd never questioned before. The couch cushion slightly indented on one side. A mug left too long on the counter, its ring a pale ghost. It still smells like him, I thought, and then hated myself for noticing. The man stayed near the doorway at first. Hands folded. I scanning, not searching. This wasn't his first time walking through a quiet aftermath. I touched the back of a chair. The fabric felt colder than I expected. This used to feel like shelter, I thought. A place where things ended gently at night. Now it felt like a stage after the lights had gone out. The performance over. The audience gone. All that remained were props that didn't know they were done being used. I wondered how long a place takes to unlearn a person. And whether it ever truly does. He stepped inside fully then. Closed the door behind him. Not loudly. Just enough to seal us in. May I? He asked, gesturing toward the hallway. He nodded. Didn't trust my voice. We moved through the room slowly, like we were afraid to disturb something sleeping. He stopped near the small desk by the window, the one I'd dusted every week without looking too closely. "Did you know about these?" he asked. He pointed, not touching, to a neat stack of papers tucked just out of sight. I shook my head. He slid one forward. "Careful. Small notes in the margins. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just enough to suggest preparation." "There were changes," he said. "Gradual." I thought of the nights he'd come home quieter. The way conversations ended sooner than they used to. How plans became vague. I had told myself that was normal. That distance was part of staying. The man moved to the kitchen next. Opened a drawer I never opened. Inside, more order than expected. Receipts. Keys labeled in handwriting I recognized. My chest tightened. "How long?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. Just said, "Long enough." We stood in the bedroom doorway last. I didn't want to go in, but my feet carried me anyway. The bed was made, too neatly. The closet, half empty. I had convinced myself I was imagining the space. That fabric settles. That hangers shift. But seeing it like this, undeniable, made something quiet inside me stand up. "He prepared," I said. "Yes," the man replied. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress didn't dip the way it used to. That's when it landed. Not all at once. Not violently. Just clearly. I hadn't been blind. Had been trained to accept partial answers. To overlook small absences. To trust tone over truth. Every sign had been there. I just kept choosing the version of the story that let me stay. The man watched me carefully. Not with pity. With respect. "People don't always hide," he said. "Sometimes they just rely on hope to do the work for them." He nodded. Hope had been very busy. We didn't stay much longer after that. There was nothing left to uncover. At the door I looked back once. Not searching. Just acknowledging. The house didn't feel angry. Or sad. Just emptied of a role it had played too well. Outside the air felt sharper. Cleaner. I breathed deeper than I had in days. The man waited for me to step away first. As if this part had to be mine alone. As we walked down the path, I realized something quietly, almost gently. I wasn't returning to the house to understand him. I was leaving it to finally see myself. The walls held their breath before we spoke. I noticed it the moment we stepped inside again. That faint pressure in the air, like a room waiting to be told the truth. Light slipped through the curtains in thin lines, stopping just short of the corners. Dust floated, slow and undecided. I placed my palm against the wall near the hallway. Oh, solid. Walls hear things even when people don't. They remember tone. Timing. What was said late at night when voices thought no one was listening. I had lived inside these walls believing silence meant absence. I was wrong. Silence had been busy, we didn't sit right away. Standing felt more honest. The man moved carefully, as if each step might wake something buried. He kept his voice low, even when there was no one else to hear. "This isn't about leaving you," he said finally. I looked at the floor. The same scratch near the doorway where a chair leg had dragged years ago. "I know how it looked," he continued. "How it sounded." I nodded once. In my head I replayed that moment again. TV going dark. The sudden absence of light. His calm voice telling me to go. No anger. No explanation. That calm had hurt more than shouting ever could. The man leaned against the counter, hands open. Not defending. Not accusing. "He didn't want you in the middle," he said. "Middle of what?" I asked. The question came out smaller than I intended. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the far wall, the one behind the bedroom. "Some things don't stay buried," he said quietly. I felt it then. That shift inside. From being unwanted to being kept away. He told me pieces. Not a full story. Just enough for the shape of it to appear. A name I didn't know. A situation that never quite ended. Old choices resurfacing at the worst time. He thought distance would protect you, the man said. Protect. The word felt strange in my mouth. I walked to the window. Outside, a woman passed with a bag of groceries. Life continuing at its usual speed. He didn't tell me, I said. No, the man agreed. He couldn't. Turn back. Why? Because once you know, he said. You're part of it. The walls seemed closer now. Not closing in. Listening. I thought of all the moments I'd mistaken for coldness. The nights he sat quietly instead of speaking. The way he'd started watching the door more often. I had assumed I was losing him. Instead, he had been guarding a boundary I never saw. The man pulled out a folded paper from his jacket. Didn't hand it to me right away. He asked me to come, he said. If things went quiet. My chest tightened. Quiet like what? Yes. Quiet like you disappearing from his life without understanding why. I sat down then. My knees didn't ask permission. So that's it, said. He pushed me away to keep me safe. The man didn't correct me. Didn't soften it either. Yes. The truth didn't explode. Settled. Heavy. Not betrayal. Not abandonment. Something harder to name. I pictured him again. Turning off the TV. Standing up slowly. Choosing his words like each one might cost something. I need you to go. Not I don't want you. Not this is over. Just go. Silence hadn't been a weapon. It had been a shield held too close to the chest. I would have stayed, I whispered. I know, the man said. That's why he didn't ask. That was the moment it broke open. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet understanding slipping into place. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it evacuates the room so danger has nowhere to land. I pressed my fingers together, grounding myself. He wasn't ending us, I said slowly. He was trying to stop something else from reaching me. The man met my eyes. Yes. When we left the house again, the walls felt lighter. As if a truth had finally been spoken out loud. Outside, the sky had shifted. Not brighter. Clearer. I stood on the steps, thinking about all the things I hadn't been told. And all the things I'd still need to decide. The man paused beside me. He didn't know how to save you without losing you, he said. I watched the door close. Not with finality. With patience. As we walked away, one question stayed with me. Not sharp. Not painful. Just honest. Was he trying to end things? Or was he trusting me to survive the truth when it finally arrived? I used to imagine how it would sound if I said everything out loud. My voice steady. His finally breaking. In my mind, the room was brighter than it ever really was. Words landed where they were meant to. Truth arrived on time. But that morning nothing happened. No raised voices. No slammed doors. Just a quiet kitchen table and a cup of tea going cold beside me. I realized then. Some confrontations don't come crashing in. They pass by softly. Like something you only notice once it's already gone. I stayed where I was longer than necessary. As if remaining still might summon the version of him who would explain everything. The chair across from me stayed empty. It had always creaked when he sat down. That sound never came. I replayed conversations we'd never finished. Pauses that felt harmless at the time. Moments I thought we could return to later. Later never arrived. Outside, the day moved on without permission. Car door slammed. Someone laughed too loudly down the block. Normal sounds. Unaware. I told myself this was what maturity looked like. Acceptance without drama. Understanding without demands. But there was a weight in my chest that didn't feel mature. Felt unfinished. I kept thinking. If I had stayed one more minute. If I had asked one better question. Maybe the confrontation would have happened. Maybe we would have said the things that now lived only in my head. Instead, all I had were imagined sentences. Practiced arguments. Words with nowhere to go to end my mind. The argument was precise. I told him he should have trusted me. That silence hurts just as much as danger. That protection without consent feels like exile. In my imagined version, he listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look away. He admitted he was afraid. Not of me, but of what might follow. We stood closer than we had in months. The space between us filled with honesty instead of caution. But none of that happened. In reality, the house stayed quiet. The air didn't shift. No truth rose to the surface on its own. I understood then. He had already chosen silence over explanation. Not because he didn't care, but because caring had limits he couldn't cross. That realization hurt in a different way. Less sharp, more permanent. I could argue with anger. I could fight betrayal. But fear doesn't debate. It retreats. And he had already gone somewhere I couldn't follow. Acceptance didn't arrive gently. It arrived slowly. Like realizing a storm has passed only after noticing the damage left behind. I stopped waiting for the confrontation. Stopped rehearsing speeches I would never deliver. I saw the truth more clearly then. Closure isn't something another person gives you. It's something you decide to live without. He had made his choice in silence. I would make mine the same way. Understanding didn't mean agreement. It didn't make the ending fair. But it gave it shape. I understood now that his fear wasn't about losing me. It was about failing to protect me. That distinction mattered. It didn't erase the hurt, but it softened the blame. Sometimes love doesn't trust itself enough to stay. Sometimes it believes absence is safer than presence. I sat with that truth until it stopped resisting me, until it felt less like a wound, and more like a scar learning its shape. That night, I turned off the light myself. No hesitation. No ceremony. The room darkened the same way it had before. Quiet. Final. I lay there listening to my own breathing. Steady. Present. There was no confrontation waiting in the shadows. No explanation knocking late. Just me. And the understanding that some endings aren't meant to be spoken. They're meant to be carried. As sleep finally came, one thought stayed with me. Not painful. Not accusing. Just unresolved enough to matter. If silence can end a story, what happens when it decides to speak next? The morning air carries the scent of wet pavement. Fog curls along the edges of the street, softening the shapes of houses and cars. I step lightly, feeling the crunch of tiny stones beneath my shoes. The house behind me is quiet now. No footsteps, no voices, just walls that once held everything I didn't understand. The man is gone, leaving only the faint echo of his presence. A folded paper, a careful explanation, and the weight of what I finally know. I exhale slowly, letting the air move through me. The silence doesn't press anymore. Wait. And I walk forward, feeling the first real clarity of my life stretching ahead. I pause at the corner, looking back one last time. The door is shut. Sunlight reflects off the glass, but it doesn't blind me. It feels deliberate, like the house itself is letting me go. I feel the heaviness lift from my chest. The questions that once spun in endless circles now settle into a quiet rhythm. I understand the dismissal, the abrupt exit, the absence that haunted my nights. It wasn't rejection. It was preparation. A space made for me to breathe, to step into what comes next. I noticed small details I had never seen before. The chipped paint along the stair railing. The way the kitchen floor catches the light in the morning. The faint scent of something burned and sweet. Memories of dinners that felt like home. Everything familiar, yet everything different. I realized that life hasn't ended where I thought it did. It pivoted instead. And I am standing at that pivot, finally noticing the direction it points. The clarity is quiet, but it's persistent. And I can feel it humming beneath my ribs, waiting to be followed. The streets are nearly empty. A dog barks in the distance. Somewhere, a child's laugh carries on the wind. I start walking without plan, letting my feet decide. In my mind, I replay everything the man said. The name I hadn't heard in years, the decisions made quietly, the warnings I never knew I needed. It all fits together now, like pieces I had forced to the wrong edges. I think of the nights I lay awake, imagining confrontations that never happened. The fear that had seemed like an end was a beginning. I remember the cold of that first night outside the door, the hesitation in his voice, the calm that cut sharper than any anger. Now it feels protective, like a shield I didn't understand until it was gone. I feel a weight shift in my chest. It's lighter, but not gone entirely. Carries the memory of what was, but also the possibility of what will be. I glance at the sky. The fog has thinned. Sunlight touches the edges of leaves, reflecting like tiny sparks. I imagine all the choices I can make now. All the steps forward I can take. Did I reach the bridge I used to cross on my way home? The river below moves steadily, indifferent to the hours, the storms, the quiet fears of the night. Pause at the railing. Hands resting on cold metal. Fingers tracing the worn paint. Everything that had felt final before. The words unspoken, the doors closed, the absence of explanation, now feels like preparation. I can step into my own life. Not as someone reacting to loss or confusion, but as someone who finally sees the shape of the path ahead. The man's voice lingers in my mind. Not commanding, not apologetic. Just present. You were never meant to stay there forever, he said. You were meant to move. I realized that being told to leave wasn't the end. It was the moment the trajectory of my life changed. The quiet that once seemed empty now feels like space. Space to understand, to grow, to live. And I finally understand the weight he carried. Protecting, shielding, keeping the truth gentle until I could receive it. I smile faintly, surprised by the simplicity of it. Life can shift quietly. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just enough for clarity to arrive that I continue walking. The city wakes around me, but I feel separate from it. Not lost. Not searching. I carry the quiet within me. Not as absence. Not as fear. But as clarity. Everything that had seemed abrupt, the dismissal, the sudden nights, the unanswered questions, was a beginning disguised as an ending. I inhale slowly. The air tastes of rain and pavement. Tastes like possibility. The man is gone. The walls no longer hold me. Path ahead is mine. And as I step forward, I know. This is not where the story ended. It is where it truly began.